Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Welcome to another installment of Mix Tips. Today we're going to be talking about preparing your mix to mix. So we'll be talking about getting everything ready, all that housekeeping kind of stuff that makes mixing later much easier. So we'll be cleaning things up, getting our DAW ready, getting our tracks set up, getting everything organized and ready to go. Now, prepping our mix is different than cleaning our mix. We did a video on that already that you'll want to check out, and that involves actually cleaning up the audio tracks so that you're taking out noise and setting the beginnings and endings and all those sorts of things. We're not dealing with that today. Today we're dealing with actually organizing your mix and getting it ready to go, so when you get into the flow of creating your mix, you won't be having to search for things and you won't be having to move things around or try to organize things. That'll all be done in advance and you can just focus on being creative. I'll be working in Pro Tools today, but whatever DAW you're using, all of these tips, all of these suggestions will apply to that DAW as well. They're just slightly different ways that you might manifest those depending on what you're using. And I'm going to start with a completely empty session. I'll be dragging my audio files in and starting from scratch. You might be starting from a session that you created as you were tracking or a rough mix or something like that. All fine. The point is to get your mix to where it's ready to go so you can just sit down, get your hands on the fader or your mouse on the fader and start mixing. First thing we'll do is get our tracks created. We'll switch over to our edit window. I've got my audio clips here. We'll drag those into Pro Tools. Once the tracks are created, you can see we have a very generic looking session here. Everything's the same color, it's all very monochromatic. When we go over to the mixer, same thing. And we've also got a lot of things there that we really don't need to see as we're mixing. So the first thing I'm going to do is prepare my DAW. And by that I mean I'm going to go through and turn off everything I don't need to see. I want to have the cleanest view possible, so again, I can just keep focused on what I'm trying to accomplish. So the first thing I don't need is I don't need to see my audio tracks at this point, so I'll hide those. I don't need to see everything from my mixer here in my edit window as well if I'm actually working back and forth in that regard. So I'm going to go up here and turn off many of those things. I might want comments. I don't need mic preamps. I don't need second set of inserts or sends. Object, real-time properties. Track color we'll leave on. We don't need an instrument in this particular track. In fact, I don't know that I even need to see my sends, my comments, any of those kind of things. Let's start with the bare minimum in this session. So I've got the name of the track, I've got my I/O, because I may be messing with different busing schemes and things like that. So I do want to see some of those kind of things. Now up here, I don't need to see all these rulers either. I don't need to see the meter, the key, the chords, tempo. Really, I need to see the bars and beats, I need to see the minutes and seconds, and I need to see any markers that I might want to drop in there. Now let's do the same thing in our mix window. We'll clean up that view to just the things we need to see for our mix. Let's open this up. I don't need to see preamps, instruments, heat. We'll just leave one set of sends and inserts. The EQ curve we can leave on, meters and faders, I/O. Right now we'll leave track color. I don't need to see comments. There, that's a much cleaner view, and it gives us much more a view like we'd have with a mixer. I also want to add a master fader to my session, so I'll go ahead and drop that in. So I have a 2-bus or a stereo output that I can work from. We'll go ahead and add that. Need a stereo. Master fader, it can be called master, and that's going to show up at the end of our session here. So we're good to go with that. One other tip is to be sure you're saving along the way so you don't have to repeat any work if you have a crash or something locks up or there's a problem. Now many DAWs will auto-save, it'll just do that for you in the background, but I like to along the way also save incremental stages. So once I've made some significant changes, I'll save with a new name. Maybe it'll be a .1, a .2, a .3, just so I can step back through time if I want to. And again, I know you can do that with auto-save and you can set up versions in certain DAWs and things. That's all great. I just like to do it manually. It's the way my brain works. Now the next step for me is to organize my tracks. I have a very specific track scheme that I always use when I'm mixing and allows me to very quickly locate different tracks in the mix. No matter what mix it might be, I can pretty quickly jump to where it's at because I know the order that I've got those tracks in. In my case, I like to start with the drums to the far left. I like the bass next to that. Typically I'll put the guitars next, keyboards after that, and then vocals. And then beyond that, I might have buses, returns, and those sorts of things, and then my master fader on the far right. Now because I always use that same scheme, as I mentioned, I can pretty quickly move around within the mix and find things. So let's go ahead and do that now. So here we've got our kick drum. There are 3 different kick drums here. I want to pull that to the far left to get us started. I want my snare next to that because that's the way I think of my drum mix. I've got 2 tracks for the snare, a top and a bottom. So I've got my 3 kicks, my 2 snares. Now we'll add the hi-hats would be next for me. Following that, I would put my toms. I've got a high tom and a low tom. So we'll put that after the hi-hats. I'd follow that up with the overheads, and if I have a drum room set up, I'd also pull that over after the overheads. In this case, I don't have one. Let's go ahead and just put that there. So these are my drums that are here. Now, while I'm here and I've already got my drums kind of grouped together, I also like to color code my instruments so they're easy to locate. I can see at a glance where things are. Now, my drums will set to, say, a blue color here, just to get things started. So now those are pretty easy to locate. They're all blue. Now I might go in later and change certain things to a different shade of blue. I might make the snare a lighter blue or something like that, again, just so it stands out. But we can fine tune that color coding later. Now let's find our bass, and we'll drop that in after our drums. It's over here on the far right. We'll pull that over left. Again, let's color code that. We'll make that sort of a purple. Now we want to put our guitars in here. Now we've actually got guitars, fuzz guitar, an acoustic guitar. That's called an atmospheric guitar. Clean electrics. We've got a distorted electric, something called electric, electric W, electric W. Those are all in the right place already. I've also got a slide guitar here and a slide, looks like some kind of slide thing here as well. So let's drag those over with the rest of our guitars. We'll select all those tracks. Let's make those red. Now we'll bring our keyboards over, drop those next to the guitars. We'll make those green. And then finally I've got my vocals here, and we'll make that yellow. The master can stay black color, that's fine. So now it's easier to see how my tracks are arranged. Now within those, it's still not real clear what we've got going on. So we want to go in and fine tune the names of our tracks as well. And this is really going to help us to identify what's going on for two reasons. Number one, when you're in the mix window, you might have a longer scribble strip where you can actually read everything that you've got in there. But when we go over to the mixer, typically you have fewer characters to work with, and you end up with these sorts of things that are 3 tracks that basically have the same name, but I'm pretty sure they aren't all 3 the same track. So we want to make sure we're differentiating those and giving them a unique name so they're easy to identify. The other thing is that when we did the session, they put MGMR to identify different people who were tracking those sessions. I don't need to see all that in my mix. So I want to go through and rename all these tracks, give them short names that are going to be easy to see. So we'll begin here. Kick in is fine. Kick out is fine. Okay, things are easier to identify at this point. So we've gotten to where we can see what these tracks are, what's on each one. Now I've got a solo here, I've got a solo here. Let's actually move those so they're closer together. We've got acoustic guitar, atmospheric guitar, clean electric. Let's take the G out of there, make that a little bit shorter. Clean stabs. In fact, we don't even need the E in there. So you can see I'm fine-tuning as I go, and whatever approach you use to naming your tracks, that's fine. As long as you can quickly identify them and they show up clearly on the scribble strips on the tracks in your mixer, you're good to go. Now again, you might want to go through and adjust your color coding a little bit. So for example, I've got my 2 solos here. We might want to change those to a slightly different red color so they show up a little bit differently. Maybe the acoustic guitar, we want to change to a slightly different color as well so it stands out. So you can go through and clean things up that way. Again, the point is to organize and get things looking the way you want them so you can quickly navigate in the session. Once I've reached this stage, I like to add some basic bussing to my mix. For example, I always bus all my drums to a stereo aux or subgroup. This allows me to have one stereo output from my drum set that I can add processing to the entire kit. I could add a send to the entire kit, and I can also manage the level of the entire kit that way. So let's go ahead and drop in a bus or subgroup for our drums. We will call that drums. Now, since this is a bus, just like our master bus, I'm going to leave that black colored at this point, just to, again, differentiate it from the audio tracks that we're working with. For the bus to work, of course, I've got to assign the outputs from all those drum tracks to that drum bus. To do this in Pro Tools, we select all the drum tracks, hold down Shift and Option on the keyboard, and then select the bus that we want to use. All those drum tracks will change to bus 1 and 2 as our output, and now we'll set the input to bus 1 and 2, and now all our drum tracks are being routed through this drums subgroup. Now I might also put all of my backing electric guitar tracks through a bus as well. So let's go ahead, create a new bus for that. We'll call that, we can name it right here. We'll call this EGTRs. We'll drop that in, and again, we want to route all of these through that. So we'll set our bus to the second bus, which is 3 and 4 in this case because we're stereo. All right, now all our electric guitars are going through this output. We might do the same with all our keys. So let's add in a bus for those. Oops. There we go, and we'll bus all those to that aux. Choose 5 and 6, and our input 5 and 6. Okay, so we've got some basic busing set up there. Now, for me, I like to go a little bit deeper than that. If we go back over to our drums, we had 3 mics on the kick drum. We had a mic inside the kick drum, we had a mic on the outside of the kick drum, and we also had a sub kick for very low frequencies. Now, it'd be nice to be able to process all those kick drum tracks simultaneously in addition to individually. So let's create another aux. It can be a mono aux, actually. We'll call that kick. Now we need to route the outputs from our 3 kick tracks through that single kick aux. So let's go ahead and select the 3 of those. Choose the bus we want. Now those are all mono tracks and they're going to be centered, so we can go ahead and just choose a mono bus for them. Set our input here to the same bus. Now we don't want this kick aux to be sent out of the stereo outputs. We want it to be sent through our drum aux. So we need to assign that to bus 1 and 2. And in fact, a cool feature in Pro Tools is you can name those buses. So let's go ahead and change the name on that. Just click rename, and let's call this drums. Now you can see that my drums are feeding into the drums aux. We can also rename the kick. We can go over here. We can rename e-guitars. And finally, we can actually go over here and rename keys. Now this is really cool because, again, it allows you just to be organized, to see very quickly what you're assigning where. Now back to our drums. Since I have 2 snare drums, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to create an aux for those. It can be a mono aux. Let's call that snare. Let's go ahead and set an input for that. It can be mono. Let's choose 8. We'll name it snare. And now let's assign our 2 snare tracks to that snare. We'll hold Shift and Option, bus, choose snare. All right, our 2 snare tracks are now going here. We also need to route the output from our snare bus over to our drums. And finally, I might also bus my toms. So let's go ahead and select those. We'll create a new aux input. Now this one I'm going to do in stereo because I want to pan my toms. I want to assign those to a bus, of course, with that. It's not 7 and 8. We want it to be 9 and 10. Let's rename it toms. Choose my 2 tom tracks. Rename to toms, or reassign rather to toms, and this needs to go to the drums bus. Okay. So I've got my drums very organized now. I've got my 3 kicks going through their own bus. I've got my 2 snares going through their own bus. My 2 toms going through their own bus. They're in stereo. All of my drums are going through a drums bus. I've got all of my guitars going through an e-guitars bus. My 2 solos are separate because I'll probably want to work on those individually. I've got my keys going through a keys bus. So I've got a lot more organization here, and I'm pretty much ready to start as far as the routing goes to get things going. Now, in addition to busing, you might also want to add VCAs that allow you to quickly adjust the levels of multiple tracks without having to go to those individual tracks individually to adjust the levels. So let's go ahead and create a group here. Choose kick, snare. I'm going to choose my buses, my overhead, and also my hats because I want to adjust all the kicks at the same time, the snares at the same time, and so on. Now we can assign our VCA to that drum group, and now we can move those faders simultaneously by just moving the drum VCA. So VCAs can be very handy in your mix as well. If you know you're going to use them, create them now so they're ready to go and you don't have to think about it later in the process. The final thing I want to do as far as this stage of the mixer goes is just get my basic panning going. So for example, I know that my toms are going to be panned sort of this way in the stereo overheads. Typically I don't run my overheads completely all the way out, so let's go ahead and get those roughly panned where we want them. Somewhere around there. My snare is going to be centered, my kick is going to be centered. My hi-hat will probably be off to one side a little bit. Bass is going to be centered. I'm not sure yet on my guitars, so I'm not going to pan those. I know that my solos are going to be centered, so those are fine. My keys are stereo, and we're good there as well. So I've just got a little bit of basic panning here. And if I did know, for example, that I wanted the acoustic guitar to end up off to the right side, I might set, or left side rather, I might set that up with a basic panning like this just to kind of get things going. Again, these are just rough positions to get me started so I have a place to begin from. All this has been basically organizational work. I'm just getting things laid out, I'm getting things basically routed, getting things kind of set to go, and I could start my mix right from this point, start adding plugins, start doing my mix moves, start setting levels, all those kind of things. Now you could start with all your faders all the way up. You could start with them all at 0 like this. These days, a lot of times I like to start with the faders down at -6. I find this gives me plenty of headroom on my stereo output bus. Gives me room to move things up, to move things down, to add EQ that might change the gain structure and so on. But you go ahead and set things up in the way that works best for you. Now at this stage, as I mentioned, you could begin your mix, but there are some optional things you could do to prepare your mix and to make things even easier down the road. For example, if you know you're going to use a particular channel strip on all your tracks, so you're working in a mix console style fashion, you might go ahead and insert that now and bypass it on all the tracks. So for example, I've got a solid state Logic UC1 hardware controller here on my desk, and I'm going to go ahead and use the channel strip on all my tracks and basically mix as if I'm working on an SSL console. So I can go ahead and insert that right now. So if I go up here, let's go ahead and set it in the center. We'll go down to SSL. We'll choose channel strip 2. If I hold the option key down while that's installing, Pro Tools will go ahead and put that channel strip on all my tracks and I'm ready to go. Now, I also want to bypass those. So in Pro Tools, we can do that by holding down the command. If I hold command option, it'll bypass all of them at the same time. So now I've got a channel strip on all my tracks as well as on all my buses. I'm pretty much ready to go. I've got a compressor and an EQ ready. Now later I can change that. I might want to use a Pultec EQ on my kick. Great. I can either take the channel strip off, leave it bypassed, deactivate it, whatever I want to do. Now some engineers also have a standard way that they like to set up their reverbs, their delays, just things to get them started. So you can go ahead and do that now as well. And then go ahead and insert a few stereo aux inputs. So let's go ahead and put in, say, 4 of those. So we'll create 4 auxes. So maybe on the first one, I want to have a plate reverb. So I'm going to come in here to my Universal Audio plugins, pull down, and we'll choose the 250 as our plug-in there. Close that. On the second one, I want more of a room reverb. So let's come down here, and I'm going to put a Lexicon 224 there that I'll set up later for a nice room. On my third one, I'm going to set up a nice delay patch. So let's drop down here to the SDD 3000. And for our fourth, I'm going to choose Clear Mountain Spaces, which is a Bob Clear Mountain plugin that gives you a lot of processing power. So I've got 4 possibilities here all ready to go, and I can bust to them very quickly and easily. I've got a plate reverb, I've got a room reverb, I've got a delay, and then we've got Clear Mountain Spaces that give us a variety of different processing options. So all those are set to go. Let's go ahead and assign those to buses. So we'll put that on 1112, put this on 1314, put this on 1516, and this on 1718, and I'm going to rename those just to keep things clear. So this is plate. Sorry, we should spell it correctly. Plate. This will be room. Oops. So like that, we'll call that delay. And finally over here, we'll call this spaces. And I misspelled that. All right, let's fix the spelling there before we move on that. Got to be organized. Okay, now when we want to add a delay, a reverb, say we want to add delay onto our fuzz solo, I can simply go down here, choose delay, and I'm set to go. This makes it very fast and very easy to set up those basic processing things that we typically use in a mix. Now, if you don't have standard things you use, that's fine, but many of us do always have a plate, always have a room, we've got a delay that we use, and so on. And so setting them up in advance, naming the bus, makes it easy to access those. As another option, many of us like to mix into processing on our 2-bus or our stereo output. You might always have a compressor there, for example. So let's go ahead and insert that and have it ready to go. So we'll go down here. I'm going to choose the SSL native bus compressor to mix into. I'm going to bypass that. I can always activate it once I start mixing, but it's ready to go. I don't have to think about it later. You can do that with an EQ or any other processing you might typically put on your stereo bus. And you know, I actually forgot one thing here, and that's I need to go back and name those buses I put on for our effects. So let's name that plate. We'll name that room. We'll name this delay. And we'll name this spaces. Why do I keep misspelling that? It needs a E but no V. Spaces, just like that. We could also color code those if we want to, so let's select them. Click down here, and maybe we'll make those this color. One other thing I'm going to do to wrap up my organizational part here is go ahead and solo safe my buses. So when I'm soloing tracks, I can still hear them through those buses. So in Pro Tools, I hold Option, click the solo button on all my buses. And now, when I solo, I'll still be able to hear the individual tracks that are going through those buses. So that's an important thing to do. I'm not going to do that with my effects at this point, because sometimes you want to hear the effects when you're soloing something, sometimes you don't, and I can go ahead and do that manually as I'm mixing. Now we're ready to go. Now it took me a little longer than typically it would because I was explaining as I went, but I can do this very quickly. I can get the tracks in, get them named, get them organized, colored, routed through different buses, add my effects and things. It's all very quick. Now you could also set up a template, drag your tracks into that template where things are already created. Whatever makes it fast for you is the way you should do it, and whatever organizational scheme and routing scheme works for you is the way you should do it. Don't necessarily follow what I did here, although this works great for me and it may work great for you as well. Do it the way that works best for you. You'll be able to sit down and now just focus on being creative as you're working on the mix. I hope you found this installment of Mix Tips useful. Be sure to check out our playlist that includes the other installments in the Mix Tips series, and watch for more in the future as well. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Click here for more videos like this one, or start at sweetwater.com for all your music instrument and pro audio needs.